First it was Angela Merkel, now it's Jacques Chirac, Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande. An angry France says that Washington must repair the damage done after Wikileaks revealed the US spied on 3 French presidents. What's the rationale of the US spying on its supposed friends? And what are the implications? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme in Doha. I'm Adrian Finighan. The United States has once again been caught spying on an ally. Documents released by Wikileaks show the National Security Agency intercepted the communications of 3 French leaders, including the current president, François Hollande. The French government says that the eavesdropping is unacceptable. However, apart from that, the anger and response from Paris suggest that the revelations aren't much of a surprise. So, is it all just part of the rough and tumble of international relations? Before we bring in our guests, Niamh Barker sets up our discussion from Paris.
Arriving at the French Foreign Ministry, the US ambassador to France, summoned to explain claims Washington spied on 3 consecutive presidents.
I summoned the US ambassador to tell her that 1, this is unacceptable, 2, that we want to know whether these practices have ceased, and 3, to ask whether these practices were only used in relation to the president or more generally. Because while we understand that there might be surveillance concerning terrorists, that has nothing to do with listening in on heads of allied states and on friends. I asked the ambassador to give us answers rapidly.
Earlier in the day, President François Hollande called an emergency Defence Council meeting to discuss the revelations. Hollande said the country would not tolerate actions that threaten its national security. The claims, reported in the French daily Libération and on the Wikileaks website, say the eavesdropping happened between 2006 and 2012. Paris says it will now send a special intelligence team to the US to investigate matters further. In the French Parliament, news of the leak prompted uproar among lawmakers from across the political divide. The country's Prime Minister promised to do everything possible to limit the diplomatic fallout.
The United States must not only admit the danger that such acts have on our freedoms, but also they must do everything and quickly to repair the damage it creates in the relationship between allied countries and between the United States and France.
Many people feel that the new spying revelations are deliberately designed to coincide with a new surveillance law devised to protect French citizens from the kind of homegrown violence witnessed here in Paris 5 months ago. But there's also now a concern that there's a blind spot in this law, raising questions as to whether France needs more security to protect itself from its friends as well as its enemies. US President Barack Obama and President Hollande have reportedly spoken to each other by telephone, with Washington promising to work as allies with France. But with Wikileaks promising more revelations to come, France may decide on a more cautious approach. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera, Paris.
All right, let's bring in our guests for today's Inside Story. From Paris, we're joined by Giudicelli, founder of a risk consultancy called TerroriscRichard. In Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and director of its Center for Political Military Analysis. And also in Paris, Nicolas Krameyer, head of freedom and expression for Amnesty International France. Nicolas specializes on the right to privacy and surveillance. Welcome to you all. And let's start with you. What are we to make of the French response to this? Anger at first, but then fairly muted on the whole. This isn't going to blow up into a transatlantic diplomatic spat, is it?
Well, if we speak about the government, for the moment, they just have taken some, let's say, formal decision, specifically statements only. Of course, you have some procedures like speaking with the French ambassador here in Paris, speaking with the president in Washington. and also to ask the French ambassador in Washington to speak to the media and to speak to the political class. But in fact, there is no real measures. So even if it's very divided here in France about what should be done, there is a, let's say, opposition who asks for more measures like sanctions, economical sanctions and diplomatical sanctions. But as you know, our French government is not at all ready for having any trouble within the diplomatic relation with the states, because the state is very I mean, the United States is a very strong ally, specifically on the military side, that we cannot do anything in France without the U.S. military. And in the same time, U.S. needs France to let's say, do some of the job they cannot do in Africa or other countries. So you see, we don't think here that we are going to a clash, even if, again, the political class is really claiming for having a real, let's say, strong act to show how we are very disappointed and even angry about what US has done.
All right, let's bring in Richard Weitz then in Washington, D.C. France has said the US has to repair the damage, is demanding answers. Apart from a Gallic shrug, what answers can Washington provide? That's just the way things are, aren't they?
Well, I think that the Obama administration has made several statements, and it's made official policy and has now responded the same way to this event, that we no longer spy on the heads of our closest allies. That was a policy shift that the president adopted, I think, last year. That leaves open the question about previous, what we were doing before then and previous presidents. I imagine as France, this probably started when Mitterrand let in some communists into the government, if not earlier. And it's just easy enough to continue these monitoring. But as far as I know, they've stopped doing this to the presidents of France, Germany, and some other key allies.
Yeah, I mean, this is the peculiar thing about Washington's response to this too. I mean, when you say that the reaction in France was fairly muted after the initial anger, Washington has said, okay, it's no longer spying on leaders of countries who are allies. That doesn't mean to say, of course, that it's not spying on anyone else in those countries.
Right, and I imagine the U.S. and other countries are. I mean, I would think that, particularly in France, that the Chinese and the Russians and many others, including maybe even the Germans, are very interested in what's happening there and probably heavily involved in monitoring the communications of leaders.
Nicolas Krameyer, is France being somewhat hypocritical here? What might its own intelligence agencies be up to?
Yeah, sure, there is a totally hypocrisy, because I think that the government's reaction is quite normal. That has been a shock, but it was not something really, really doubtful, because we saw this with Angela Merkel's cell phone like a few years ago. And so that we know that the US administration is using this kind of spying methods on world leaders and allies. But on the same side, France has just voted and passed a new surveillance law, a new intelligence law that authorizes quite many unlawful practices in terms of privacy, violations to the right to privacy, freedom of expression, as the US Patriot Act did in 2001. So yeah, there is a hypocrisy, because France is legalizing the same kinds of methods and programs right now in the country.
And do you agree with that, or is this new law that France has implemented necessary to prevent homegrown terror attacks?
Well, as your guest said, there is actually, anyway, the new intelligence bill has been voted, so it's now under process, I mean. The thing is that also for this law, there was a big debate and the division within the political class, in the meaning that some of the people said that we have not to do like the NSA does to France, in the meaning that we are going to on the same path than the US as a big brother power, let's say, which is not the case because as it's obvious now that we have been spied. So the meaning is not to spy the other. Before spying the other, we have also to prevent other to spy us. That's also another point. But since this law is not like a Patriot Act, there was a big hole, let's say, in the intelligence law, in the meaning that there was no jurisdictional frame to any kind of intelligence actions, not only spying but also pursuing people outside or inside the country. So, that story about the NSA became a kind of tool for opponent to this law in order to, in trying not to vote for it.
Okay, Richard, you alluded to why France might have the US rather might have implemented this this spying program on French leaders a few minutes ago. I'm just wondering why the US would spy on an ally. I mean, surely there are intelligence sharing arrangements between the two countries already. They're allies, or can't even friends be trusted?
It's not really a question of trust. I mean, the French government and other entities in France have legitimate secrets they don't want to share with the U.S. government, but the U.S. would like to have them. So the U.S. will try and obtain them. I mean, some of the information, it's probably related to monitoring. There's suspicions that the French government uses some of its espionage to support private French corporations. So I imagine they would want to know about that, since the U.S. considers that practice illegal, whereas spying on other governments, it's something the U.S. government accepts, at least in public. There's probably concerns about French terrorist activities, not of course by the government, but there's a lot of radical groups active in Europe, including in France, and the U.S. would want to be able to monitor that. As one of our previous guests mentioned, U.S. capabilities in this area are very strong, probably stronger than many European governments, which is why they want to continue this relationship. On the other hand, the U.S., as far as I know, relies heavily on France to inform it about what's going on in Africa, as was mentioned, but probably Lebanon too, and some other countries where the French are very strong. So there's just a lot of reasons why the U.S. would want to work and cooperate with the French, but also have an independent capability to identify things which the French might not want to tell them.
Nicolas, how much harm have the likes of Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks done to the intelligence communities around the world? Have lives really been put at risk? And has the war on terror been hampered by these leaks?
I really don't think so. I really think that this kind of illegal programs, being these illegal torture detention centers that we saw, that we continue to see in Guantanamo or elsewhere, that illegal surveillance program, mass surveillance programs, they are harming the values of human rights, and these are the values that our governments are trying all the time to defend and promote, and say that we are a country of freedoms and of respect to freedoms. And what we are doing right now is in the name of security, harming our most core values in terms of human rights. So to me, these revelations are very, very useful and should be very more widely known and taken into account by the international public opinion, because today, in terms of technologies, Big Brother is just possible and is alive in a sense. What we see with the WikiLeaks revelations in France is that there has not been strong revelations, top secret revelations, but the documents were top secret. What does this mean? It means that the capacities, capabilities for the different intelligence agency, they can spy on quite everything, which is just not useful. The Wikileaks revelations from yesterday, you would have read the French press, have talked to some key people in the government, you would have had quite the same information. So I'm not saying that there are no more top secret documents and revelations than the documents that have been leaked. But what we see is that now the technologies and the capacities of the intelligence programs can be very, very, very dangerous for our rights, for everybody's rights, for our right to privacy, to freedom of expression. And let me just remind you something. 2 days ago in the UK, there has been a ruling by the APT, so the Tribunal for Intelligence Services, that ruled that there had been surveillance, illegal surveillance, against 2 international human rights NGOs, one working on Egypt and one working in South Africa. And they were based in London, and the intelligence services there have spied on them. And so we are, and probably Human Rights Watch and probably Amnesty and probably many other human rights organizations are spied on. What the law has passed yesterday, the French law, what it authorizes is now that human rights organizations wanting, for example, to denunciate or to report on national interests in France, we can be spied on now, and that's everybody's right to defend it.
You raised some interesting points that I want to return to in a few moments. But first, one nation spying on another is not exactly news. It happens all the time, as we're learning. What's making these revelations especially newsworthy is that the US is spying on more of its friends. Now, 2 years ago, the National Security Agency was accused of targeting German Chancellor Angela Merkel. A similar period of outrage in Berlin followed those revelations, which was followed by a report in Der Spiegel. The newspaper said German intelligence had spied on 2 US secretaries of state. And a parliamentary investigation in Germany revealed German agents spied on the French government and passed their findings on to the US. Richard Weitz, it seems that everybody's at it here. As far as the US is concerned, shouldn't the United States be more concerned perhaps not with spying on its allies, but on nations such as China and Russia, countries that pose a real risk to its interests?
I would think that the problem we all have is that the people who really know this area very well don't or shouldn't talk to the media, and the people like us who don't have insights on the on the inside, we're sort of speculating. But I would think that the U.S. makes its prime targets would be Russia and China. And we are most concerned about, at least in the U.S., Russian and Chinese capabilities, because they are designed to potentially to harm the United States, which that really isn't the intent of the intelligence gathering by France and Germany. It's more indirect, trying to benefit their companies. But it's not. There's no evidence they want to actually harm the U.S. Whereas China and Russia would want to harm at least the U.S. intelligence agencies, since they consider them rivals. There's also a lot of concern about the Chinese using a lot of the information they gather to help state-run companies, something we can't do in the U.S. because it's not clear who the U.S. government, among other problems, who the U.S. government would support. Your previous speaker also made a very important point that what we've often seen is that technology has been driving policy. So we develop this great capability, and people will then apply it without fully thinking through the consequences, such as monitoring Merkel's phone. And so it sometimes takes a while for the policy to catch up. And people are always going to be in a situation in which there'll be a new technological development, and it'll take a bit of time to understand its full policy implications, and then we try and repair the damage afterwards.
And Giudicelli, do you agree with that? I mean, the US perhaps is now catching up. Its policy is catching up with the technology, and the country is drastically reducing its surveillance activity. It seems, as we were hearing from Nicolas, perhaps that France is going in the opposite direction now.
Well, let's say that trust is not enough in friendship. So even if we have allies, there is always national interest first. So let's say, allow me to be a bit cynical, but what is going on now is not new, and we have a lot of stories, even before the technology, if you want. You know that in the relationship also between France and US, there is really a better and increasing exchange. You have increasing exchange in matter of intelligence, but it's only on one side, meaning that there is, I heard about some people within the French internal intelligence saying that they disagree with the demand of the US intelligence to provide with some information regarding potential jihadists and so on.
Okay. Make the point briefly if you can, because I want to get one more answer in from Nicolas, and we're running out of time here.
There is also another point that your guest didn't speak about, is the fact that there is this organization, a very close one, which is called the Five Eyes. And France many times asked for being part of this structure, intelligence structure, which contain the US and New Zealand and the British and that's 5 countries which are, let's say, traditional allies for the United States. But France yet didn't get the approval to be among them. So that, you see, the trust is not so well balanced.
Nicolas, are we headed, do you think, towards a new era of a new Cold War era, if you like, where it's Russia versus China, East versus West, but it's not just countries and politicians and military targets that are being spied upon. We're all the subjects of surveillance.
Yeah, now it's really a question of we're all the subjects of surveillance. It's not only about the US program of the Five Eyes Alliance. It's about France, but it's also about Pakistan, which has passed a very drastic law on surveillance recently. Netherlands, Switzerland, other countries are passing new bills that authorizes a framework for surveillance and mass surveillance, undiscriminated surveillance, that is very dangerous for everyone's rights. And to me, we have, because it's secret by definition, we as citizens have less and less possibilities to contest, to oppose us to these kinds of programs of surveillance, because much of what happens is secret. So what we are just reivindicating is that for the digital world, that we have the same laws that protects the right to privacy and freedom of expression as it is on the offline world. You wouldn't accept that someone knocks at your door every morning to see what's in your your post box or in your office or in your kitchen. So you don't have to accept that all your digital life, which is very, very much precise, is in the hands of many actors, and where you don't know anything about what is done with all this data.
Food for thought. On that perhaps disturbing note, we'll have to leave it. Thank you to you all, Anne Giudicelli and Nicolas Krameyer in Paris and Richard Weitz in Washington, D.C. And thank you for watching. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on our discussion. You can contact us via our programme page at aljazeera.com. You can also post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From Doha, it's Adrian Finighan here, wishing you goodbye for now. See you again.